Great. Thanks for putting that in there.
You're very welcome. What kind of beer are you drinking, Ben?
Some kind of hazy IPA that I'm trying for the first time. Yeah, it's pretty good.
Good.
I feel like that. Yeah, I feel like everything is a hazy IPA now, so I feel a little bit bad about just following the trend, but it's still good. What's in your wine glass there?
My goblet.
Yeah.
I have a really nice California Cab Sauv from Napa. I figured it was a night to celebrate, so I opened up a nice bottle.
That's great. Is it everything you hoped for?
It is. Has that very dusty taste of an old cab.
Are you a wine connoisseur?
I like wine a lot, yeah. And my partner's mom just got me these really neat kind of beveled glasses, which I'm pretty excited about.
Cool. Wow.
She knows me well.
Yeah, those are like medieval.
I know, they're pretty great. They're pretty great. And with COVID, I mean, without celebrating with friends and family, it's nice to at least have nice glassware to drink out of.
Yeah, definitely. My parents were talking about doing sort of like a virtual wine tasting where, you know, they and me, my wife, and then my brother and his girlfriend all sort of get on Zoom calls together and drink the same bottle and talk about it. I thought that sounded like fun.
Oh, that's a great idea. I love that.
Yeah.
That's what your
really
family did? Is that what you said?
Yeah.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, she's talking about like hiring a sommelier to kind of like facilitate the conversation too, because we don't know anything about wine, so like a professional.
It's such a good idea. I love that.
Yeah, I think it'd be fun. Yeah, we're really uncultured beer drinkers in this house. We don't drink a whole lot of wine, but always wanted to educate myself.
There's a lot to know.
Seems like it, yeah.
And a fun process, right? To learn it all.
Yeah. Right now I'm doing an article for a magazine about sort of about fisheries basically, and sort of like local small scale, sort of community supported fisheries that are sort of thriving during COVID. So this scallop fisherman in Maine has been sending me like bags of scallops, and they all have sort of, they all come from like different parts of the Maine coastline, and they all have like their different kind of terroirs basically. It's really fun, and it's cool because like I never really thought about shellfish as having this sort of distinctive grape-like individuality, but tasting these different bags of scallops, it's very clear. It's cool.
That is really interesting, and also what a pleasure to be able to taste scallops like that.
Yeah, it's amazing. They've got this business where they send them like never frozen overnight with like a little cold gel pack to keep them cool. So we've been getting scallops shipped to our front door from Maine. It's kind of indulgent, but a nice job perk.
Well, now pair that with your family wine tasting and you'll be set for the holidays.
Right, exactly.
Well, it's right about 6 o'clock, so I think if our local authors and Lands Council team are ready, we should get this holiday party started. So welcome everyone to the Lands Council's first ever Zoom holiday party 2020. Interesting times, and we're really happy that you're all here. Right now it looks like there are about 65 attendees. We plan to have a lot more in the next minute. So I will get started. We want to first thank our two writers and authors, Eli Francovich and Ben Goldfarb. We're very excited to be joining them in their living room as they bring us into their cozy reading nooks to read and tell a story about both their works and also to have a conversation, a candid conversation about coexistence. So thank you so much to them. We will have an opportunity, if you have questions during this presentation, feel free to throw them in the chat or the Q&A, and we'll address those at the end after the conversations. So, but a little bit about Lands Council first to get things started. As most of our members and supporters know, the Lands Council has been around for decades, 37 years at this point. And our mission is to protect and revitalize in the Northwest forests, waters, and wildlife. So under that umbrella and that mission, we have a large range of diverse programs that have evolved over the years. Those programs are always, we're able to adapt to a changing climate and find innovative solutions. So a few examples of some of our current programs are so under the umbrella of Forest, Waters, and Wildlife, we do outdoor education and field science with Project Sustain. That's Kat Hall and her very cute dog Dakota by her feet, teaching a field science lesson on Mount Spokane about snowpack in a changing environment. So that's our education piece. We also plant thousands of trees and restore stream sides and tributaries that feed the Spokane River. We do this to reduce sediment, cool temperatures, to create some habitat, and mainly to keep that water that goes into the Spokane River clean. We also plant trees in an urban environment. We plant street trees, and we plant those to mitigate stormwater, and really importantly, to reduce canopy inequity. We started a biochar program recently where we take forest fuels like branches and leaves and slash piles. We burn them at high heats in that specialized kiln, creating biochar. And biochar acts like a sponge, a carbon burnt ashy sponge that essentially becomes a forest floor sponge, keeping things more moist. We work to fight the fossil fuel industry through community organizing and by working with other organizations and coalitions to stop fossil fuel terminals and fight big oil, which is huge. We also work on forests. We collaborate with diverse stakeholders to increase thousands of acres of roadless wilderness areas so that the areas that we love, we can preserve and still enjoy in the ways that we love to enjoy them. And finally, we work to protect and advocate for wildlife, namely beavers and wolves, which we're going to dive into more tonight. This is a very cute picture of beavers. And while the Lands Council doesn't have a story to read by our fireplace, I went with the tropical palm instead. Well, we don't have a book or a story, although we should consider writing a book about the history of what we've done over the years. I just want to give a really brief overview of one program that will relate to our conversation tonight, and that's our Beaver program. The Beaver program started in 2008, and it started with Mike Peterson, our executive director, who most of you know and love, and former staff member Brian Walker, who I hope is on tonight. There was a proposal from the state of Washington asking for ideas on how to increase water storage and availability demands. And most of the proposals were about big excavation projects, but Mike and Brian sat down and they thought, how can we as the Lands Council address some of these needs with some of the tools that we have? And so they dreamt up the Beaver solution and the Beaver project. And so they received funding to study what the average water storage of a beaver dam would create. That picture there and the previous one is Amanda Parrish, who you also all probably know and love, out there years ago measuring, in her waders, measuring the depth and width of these beaver dams. If we could scroll back to the other one of her, just in case she's on and wants to, there we go, there she is. So that idea is that they would live trap beavers and families of beavers, especially nuisance beavers that cause problems for landowners, basement flooding, etc. They would take those beavers and relocate them to more desirable areas to do what beavers do best and be our ecosystem architects and create wetlands, create water availability, water storage, etc. And I'm sure Ben will go into much more detail on all the great benefits that beavers and beaver dams have. So pretty soon, the Lands Council became national leaders in beaver relocation and using beavers as agents of restoration. And what that ended up looking like was past staff member Joe Cannon built a beaver holding pen in his backyard in Northwest Spokane. And he would use his personal Subaru to transport these beavers from the nuisance beaver sites to the Colville National Forest and release them. It became a really well-loved program at the Lands Council that's continued today. Chris Bachman is running that program today. So today, to date, the Lands Council's relocated 150 plus beaver throughout Northeast Washington, and we've grown that program recently to include beaver dam analogs, BDAs. And these BDAs are really interesting, again, innovative solutions to a really complex problem. BDAs, we essentially mimic a beaver dam by weaving branches through these posts that are hammered into creeks and streams. That way, all the water coming up to these will kind of backflow and create those wetlands. As you can see there, that's former staff member Brian Walker and great community partner and Kat Hall looking at a successful BDA with the branches weaved in there. It's not as pretty as a beaver dam and you don't have the cute beavers in it, but it really is an effective tool in water availability, storage, water filtration, etc. And so beaver dams in general, they create natural fire breaks. The animals that are in these wetlands that the beaver dams create are just vast and incredibly important to their growth. Fish grow larger in these wetlands. Wetlands are nature's filtration system, and especially in summers when we need more water, these beaver dams are incredibly important to the landscape because they hold that water there. And again, I'll let Ben, the expert, talk more about that too. But the commonality in this history of the beaver program is that the Lands Council is able to tackle a problem and find an innovative solution with the tools that we have and with our nimble ability to take direct action. And we do that because of our community partnerships, partners like our support of local authors, Ben and Eli, thank you, our members, etc. And I really encourage everyone on this really fun, cozy story hour tonight to check out Lands Council's website and our projects. Even our most engaged members are not fully aware of all of the things that we do that are under that umbrella of forests, waters, and wildlife. So again, I think there'll be something in the chat, but check out what we do after this call. And I'd also really like to take this quick opportunity to ask for your support in our work. We couldn't do what we've done for 37 years without the support of dedicated community members who show up for us and support us. Again, we're a nonprofit. We're supported by the community. So tonight, we have an opportunity to do a text to give. So as you're on your phone in between being at the edge of your seat listening to our riveting stories, I encourage you to text that number at the screen there and make a donation to our organization. It's a donation that will support forests, waters, and wildlife, not just for today, but for future generations. And right now, that's incredibly, incredibly important. We usually ask our members at our jazzy holiday party to help decorate our tree by buying an ornament and placing it on the tree. So we're doing that virtually. For every donation, we're gonna add something to our tree, and that link is also in the chat. So check out Lands Council's programs. Please consider supporting us. And without further ado, instead of a jazz band and nice cocktails, we now are being invited into Ben and Eli's living rooms, into their fire nooks to hear their stories. So without further ado, here is our esteemed board member supreme, Ben Goldfarb, author of Eager, The Surprising Secret Life of Beavers and Why They Matter. Ben, take it away.
Thanks a lot, Chelsea, and thanks for explaining with such lucidity and passion the importance of beavers. I really appreciate that. And certainly I can say that years ago, before I lived in Spokane, working on Eager, I looked to the Lands Council as an expert in the field, and I quoted Joe Cannon extensively in my book. And since moving to Spokane and becoming part of the Lands Council, it's really been a great pleasure to dive deeper into the program with Chris Bachman, who's just a fantastic steward of these animals and leader, and has really taken the beaver program in some exciting new directions. Last month I was out there with Chris and Eli, who wrote a great story about this for the Spokesman, installing a flow device or a beaver deceiver that helps landowners non-lethally coexist with beavers. So it's just really exciting to see the Lands Council not only trapping and relocating beavers, but helping landowners live alongside beavers in place. I think that's a really promising direction. So tonight, I wanted to read a little bit about beavers from a passage that wasn't actually in Eager. I'm sure many people on this at this party have heard excerpts from the book or have read the book. So I want to do something a little bit different. So this story that I'm going to read to you tonight is about beavers in a different part of Washington State. I guess a couple of years ago, after the book was published, I was receiving some emails and calls about this kind of interesting phenomenon, which was beavers living in coastal Washington and kind of the Puget Sound area. And beavers, of course, are this iconic freshwater animal. We don't think about beavers living in salt water, but I was hearing from veterinarians who were actually seeing beavers washing up on the beach with salt poisoning. At the same time, I was also hearing from salmon biologists, fish biologists, who were observing beavers building these dams and these kind of intertidal coastal channels in the Puget Sound salt marshes that were actually creating really good little pools for salmonids. And I think that one of the great things about the Lands Council, is that, of course, although it's based here in Spokane, its work really touches upon the entire inland Northwest and even the coastal Northwest. These animals and landscapes and waterways that the Lands Council works on are, of course, connected across vast landscapes. There's this kind of amazing trophic cascade, essentially, where wolves are sort of controlling grazing so that beavers can thrive, and beavers are building the kind of the deep water refuges that salmon need to survive, and the salmon are sustaining orcas, of course. So although the Lands Council is based in the inland Northwest, these kind of flows across the landscape that the Lands Council is helping to sustain really influence the entirety of Washington State, from the sort of terrestrial predators like wolves, through beavers, through salmon, to marine predators like orcas. So that's the passage I wanted to read for you tonight, is actually about coastal beavers and how important they are in their own right. So here goes. Got my giant book here. Among the best places to encounter coastal beavers is the Quileute Estuary, the salt marsh that lies at the mouth of the Snohomish River, a 20-mile watercourse that winds from the Cascade Mountains through verdant Puget Sound bottomlands. One summer morning, I kayaked through the estuary with David Bailey, a biologist with the Tulalip tribes, whose reservation lies just up the coast. Bailey and I paddle upstream against the outgoing tide, the air salty and rotten on my tongue. The endless tidal flats are somber and ashen, pierced by skeletal spruces that tower over the plain like giant chess pieces. Bailey works in the Tulalip Beaver Project, a close Lands Council partner, I should add, capturing troublemaking rodents around the greater Seattle area and relocating them to federal lands. Yet he and Molly Alves, a wildlife biologist with the tribes, first encountered intertidal beavers in the Quileute Estuary entirely by accident, while conducting early morning bird surveys. Beavers have since haunted the scientists' visit to the estuary, often shattering its serenity with gunshot-like tail slaps, their signature alarm signals. They'll scare me half to death, Bailey grumbles, dipping his paddle. After 15 minutes, we arrive at a channel, a thin seep of fresh water that courses down to the estuary through a gash in the floodplain. We pull onto the wedge of gloop that passes for a beach and clamber from our kayaks. I immediately sink mid-thigh in the slop, where, despite vigorous thrashing, I remain, like a mammoth trapped in the La Brea tar pits. With a mighty lunge, I fall forward, shedding my mud-cemented waders. Now shoeless and stripped to jeans, I lie down to distribute my weight across the jello-ish ground and flop, seal style, onto a stable tuft of marsh grass. An osprey taunts me with a whistle. That's probably why nobody studies these beavers, Bailey quips from the safety of high ground, because it sucks. We slug up the steep-sided channel, slop oozing through my socks with each difficult step, into the tidal shrub zone, the narrow band of estuary that's elevated just enough to sustain woody plants like willows, but too soggy to support most large trees. At last, we reach the beaver's stronghold. I am underwhelmed. A ramshackle dam of sticks and mud, perhaps 2 meters wide, spans a trickle of murky water. Behind it swirls a stagnant pool clouded with algae. Compared with majestic beaver-built bulwarks I've seen elsewhere, it's a sad specimen. What this dam lacks in aesthetics, though, it makes up for in hydraulic brilliance. With the tide out, Bailey explains, this dam holds back water that would otherwise run to the sea, forming a deep bathtub in which beavers shelter from black bears and coyotes. Come back 6 hours later, and the returning tide will have filled this channel, completely submerging the dam. You could kayak right over the top of it and not even know it was there, Bailey says. In other words, the estuary's beavers seem to anticipate tidal fluctuations, erecting their dams in places that ensure water remains even when the tide is out. The Army Corps of Engineers could hardly have done it better. We wander the floodplain's labyrinthine channels, fighting through tangles of wild rose that shred my socks and slash my forearms, and serve as Fort Beaver's defenses. Burrows and dens riddle the banks, their entrances barricaded with microdams, stick piles cemented with mud, perhaps intended to keep the tunnels inundated during low tide, and thus impenetrable to intruders. It's almost like they're engaging different areas of the estuary at different tidal levels, Bailey marvels. It's a whole multi-story housing complex. At the complex's hub is the main lodge, excavated beneath the arched roots of a dying spruce and capped with a mound of dried sedge. The elaborate compound recalls an ant or termite colony, the sophisticated development of an inscrutable intelligence. Though I'm none too pleased with my muddy, shoeless condition, I have to admit I'm impressed with the beaver's ingenuity. These are boom times in the beaver restoration business. In arid ecosystems like Nevada and Central Oregon, the rodents are increasingly perceived as hydrological saviors, capable of creating reservoirs for ranchers, dampening the spread of wildfire, and, by keeping streams cold and hydrated in the face of drought, even helping the warming West adapt to climate change. Among coastal scientists, however, beaver fever has yet to spread. Beaver biologists focus on freshwater, where their subjects usually hang out. Coastal ecologists, meanwhile, gravitate towards sedge-filled lowlands, the dominant habitat in most Washington estuaries. As for the tidal shrub zone, that narrow, impregnable band of sweetgale and wild rose where beavers flourish and scientists fear to tread, it's neglected, or it simply no longer exists, drained and diked and cleared by farmers a century ago. In the Skagit Delta, 95% of tidal shrublands have been destroyed. In a sense, then, our coastal beaver blind spot is an artifact of history, a form of ecological amnesia. Just as sun-blotting flocks of passenger pigeons and earth-shaking herds of bison vanished from our skies and prairies, the combination of marsh drainage and trapping white beavers from our coastlines, and eventually, our memories. Washington's estuaries are more than beaver bastions, then. They're portals to a former paradise, a salmonid haven constructed and maintained by rodents. As for how those intertidal architects survive in the saltwater, well, as Aldo Leopold once wrote, what a dull world it would be if we knew all about geese. Some beaver mysteries, perhaps, are destined to remain unsolved. I think that just, to me, that really gets at a lot of what the Lands Council is trying to achieve. You know, we don't really know what a fully beavered landscape looked like and felt like and how it functioned. But you know, we know that all over the American West, especially here in Eastern Washington, bringing back these beaver-created ecosystems is crucially important. The Lands Council is doing that work, and your support would truly help further that cause. So thanks so much, and I'll turn it back over to Chelsea.
You will, but the host has to give me the video back. So in the meantime, enjoy a sip of wine or beer. There we go. Cheers. Thank you so much, Ben. Again, Ben is our board member. the Lands Council Board, and we really appreciate your support and your ask of everyone else to support us. So thank you so much. And may I say, great fire. And I love the giant book, Ben. That was a great touch. That I felt like I was cozied up reading a story with Santa. So without further ado now, I'd like to introduce Eli Francovich, who's an outdoors reporter for the Spokesman Review and who's writing a much anticipated book on wolves in Eastern Washington. So Eli, thank you so much for being here with us tonight, and please take it away. Cheers.
Cheers. Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm really thrilled, and thanks to everyone that's tuned in right now. It means a lot. This will be the first time I've read from my book, which is still, quite a bit of ways away from publication. So I guess that's lucky or maybe unlucky for you, depending on your perspective. And like Chelsea mentioned, I'm the outdoors reporter for the Spokesman Review. I cover the environment, conservation, and recreation. And this, the book started with the story about 2 years ago. I was pretty new to the beat still, and I was trying to wrap my hands and head around the wolf recolonization in Washington, right, and what that meant and how that had unfolded and was unfolding. And I always felt just I felt like I was missing something. So, not like I wasn't quite getting. It felt like there was a bigger or more interesting story, and I wasn't quite getting it. And so, in an effort to get at that, I went on a tour of wolf country in the Colville National Forest with a biologist and a rancher and a politician who represented ranchers up there. And we spent a very hot and dusty September day driving around in a truck. All of us jammed into this truck and stopping and looking up at the hills and looking at cattle and sort of just, hearing a lot of the same talking points. And it wasn't a bad trip, but it wasn't, it didn't really inspire me. And I still felt like something was lacking. And right at the end of that day, we passed this camp right snugged up against the Forest Service road. And there's 2 tents and no shade except for one spot. And in that one spot of shade, there's a couple horses tethered up. And this lanky guy walks out and meets us, and that's Daniel Curry. And pretty much right from when I met him, I knew that there was something different about him and that he had a story that I was really interested in. And so we stayed in touch, and I kind of learned about this guy. He was, like most children, really deeply connected and had a deep connection with the natural world and animals. But for whatever reason, that's persisted into his adulthood. So when he was 20, he started working at Wolf Haven on the west side, and he worked there for a decade, and he ended up being sort of the equivalent of a vet technician there, treating sick wolves and really spending a lot of amazing time, hands-on time with these captive wolves. At that same time, as you all know, wolves were coming back to Washington from Canada and from Idaho and Montana. And as they were coming back, there was conflict, right? And Daniel was seeing this and reading this, and just like it was eating at him, because like I said, he has this like deep connection, mystical connection with the natural world and wolves in particular. And, he told me like that he felt like he was preaching to the choir working at Wolf Haven, and he wanted to, get in there and get into the thick of it. So in 2012, he packed up his entire life and moved to Eastern Washington, right? And to Colville area, right in the center of our wolf population and the conflict. And, he had none of the sort of the skills that would help him ingratiate himself with that community. He had horses, but he'd never really ridden them for more than a couple hours. He had hardly ever driven in the snow. He grew up in a sort of urban environment, right? But over the course of several years, he kind of learned these things he needed to do and started preaching this coexistence mission and vision that he has, and started a nonprofit that works to teach ranchers how to live alongside wolves. And so now he's a range rider, and he's really self-taught. He has mentors, but he's taught himself all these skills needed to keep wolves from eating cattle and from cattle to being eaten by wolves. And it's quite a diverse skill set. And like I said, he's taught himself. So the thing that ultimately attracted, that's just a good story right there. But the thing that really got me about and gets me about him is he has, like I've said, this very mystical connection with wolves in the natural world, but his head is not in the clouds. He's very realistic about what it takes and what it doesn't take to live alongside wild carnivores, right? And he's very committed to making it work for both, the animals and people. And so the piece I'm going to read, excerpt from my book, is a part of the introduction, and it's recounting a day I spent with Daniel learning to ride a horse. Basically, I have no background with horses, which is going to become quite evident here. And it's sort of a snapshot into what he does on a daily basis. So I'll start that now. And thanks for listening. It rained early, the drumming on my tent drowning out the noise of the nearby creek. Our camp is in the middle of a long abandoned town, Diamond City. A massive 15-foot fireplace, lush with vegetation and moss, is the central remnant. Concrete blocks and deep stagnant wells, now full of trash, pepper the woods. In the 1920s, this city popped up around the logging interests of the Hatch Company. At the time, one of the largest matchmakers in the United States. Based in Ohio, they had a plant here in Washington. The town of Diamond City harvested white pines. That's all long gone, although the pines remain. Breakfast with Daniel is a truncated affair. He eats one meal a day. After he eats, he says, he falls asleep no matter what. So that meal is usually late at night, which for me means a quick breakfast, and then we're saddling up 2 of Daniel's 6 horses. Today's mission is mostly a crash course in equestrian skills for me, although there's a trail we need to clear. The trail, which follows an abandoned roadbed, heads north into thicker and steeper country where cattle graze. A clear trail allows Daniel to easily check on these cattle and hopefully keep wolves away from them. I ride one of Daniel's 6 horses, Raven, a jet black Arabian quarter horse. He is a beautiful and powerful animal, and the only horse Daniel owns that has papers, that is, a traceable and venerable ancestry. Raven, for his part, knows he's a handsome lad and doesn't take kindly to fools. Unfortunately, when it comes to horses, I am a fool. We ride up the narrow road, sawing through downed trees and hacking at encroaching vegetation. It goes okay until we turn back. Daniel describes horses as 1,000-pound third graders and treats them as such. He's kind, doesn't use bits, rarely strikes them, and employs a type of progressive discipline that makes the best, most conscientious parents look like capricious fools. Do this, he says, and the horse will learn to trust and respect you. I try, but I keep getting stuck on the first half of his description, 1,000 pounds. This is a big animal, an animal that could toss me from its back and be gone faster than I could yell, whoa. Thus, I'm a little lax with the discipline, and Raven, like many handsome creatures, used to skating by on good looks, doesn't like to work all that hard. So when he is compelled to carry foolish reporters, he likes to eat. We walk along slowly, and then he stops, bends his graceful neck, and nibbles away. I make a little kissing noise that, when done by Daniel, snags Raven's attention as if a gun went off. I go. Crunch, crunch, Raven responds, happily ignoring my sodden salutations. And so it goes for several hours, Raven trundling along slowly, eating often, and occasionally heeding my requests. By my standards, this is a victory. The 1,000-pound third grader has allowed me to live another day. When we turn around, I breathe easier. Raven, too, is excited to go home, and suddenly the lethargic little walk he's been doing, which was just fine by me, turns into an excited trot. Daniel is leading, of course, and this keeps Raven from bolting altogether. But it's quickly evident that I have no control. Heading down a particularly steep hill, Raven guns it, dragging me through low-lying tree branches. I squeeze my eyes shut and feel thankful that I have medical insurance. Daniel goes, and Raven screeches to a stop, ears attentive, eyes on Daniel, the perfect picture of obedience. I pull some woody debris from my hair. For the next hour, we work on discipline. We walk the same section of trail over and over. I ask Raven to stop. If he doesn't listen to me, which mostly he doesn't, I then ask him to back up. Slowly, Raven gets the picture. This is important, Daniel says. When we're actually out in the mountains, on really treacherous terrain, Raven has to listen to you. To our left, the trail drops steeply 50 feet to a raging creek, jammed with logs, which makes me wonder what true topographical treachery looks like. It's slow, frustrating work for both Raven and I. Daniel, for his part, teaches with the patience of the Buddha. When we finally get back to camp, Raven is excited to get the saddle off, get under his tarp, and eat some hay. That's not the plan. Instead, we rest for about an hour and then head out to ride again. Daniel is giving me a crash course on horsemanship, after all. Raven is tethered to the horse trailer with a thick line of rope. I approach him to put his reins on, a job I've learned to do somewhat efficiently. I untie the thicker line and retie it around the back of his neck, a technique Daniel taught me. I then start to place the reins on Raven, a thick loop of stout rope that sits on his sensitive snout. He snorts, shakes his pretty head, and backs up. The thick line tightens on the back of his neck. He starts to panic and raises up on his hind legs, kicking his feet forward. Daniel, who's on the other side of the trailer and out of sight, senses this disturbance and yells, "Get away from him." No need to say it twice. Raven bucks again and then slips his neck from the thick line and is free. Start to run. It would be a beautiful sight if I wasn't so worried about those hooves. Daniel is on it. He follows Raven, not running, but not exactly walking either. "Come on," he says. "Calm down." Raven roars through camp, briefly gets tangled in the lines holding up our rain tarp, rips through and is free again. Daniel follows. In the woods nearby, there's a large hole, one of those old, long-abandoned wells now full of trash. Daniel gets in between Raven and this death trap, and, using a combination of stomps and smooches, pushes Raven away from camp and uphill into thicker brush and out of my sight. 5 minutes later, he walks back, Raven in tow. My ride is canceled. Daniel and Raven are going to spend some time together, he says. They need to have a talk. Raven knows he's messed up. As the rain comes down, he stands tethered to the trailer, head hanging. No hay yet. They ride off. I'm left at camp with Jess, one of Daniel's employees. We build a fire and start drying our boots as night settles. The sky is a roiling mass. Rain clouds dominate one half, the pastel colors of a setting sun the other. Several hours later, Daniel returns. As he ties Raven up for the night, he's beaming, a wide-open smile, the kind you don't often see on adult men. He nuzzles Raven and comes to the fire. "What a ride," he says. "I needed that." A reminder of why he loves this work, why he does what he does. They rode far and fast. Raven responded to his voice alone, the reins barely needed. "We had a talk," he tells me. "He'll be better with you tomorrow." The fire is sputtering, a combination of wet wood and rain. "Do you mind?" Daniel asks, gesturing toward the smoky mess. "Go for it, please." I don't know what he does, a simple readjustment undoubtedly, thermodynamically explainable. But in that moment, it's magic. The fire roars to life. Daniel sits back into his chair, takes off his boots, beams into the dark. He is a man connected and content, a man at home with the wild. He's at peace. Like most born to this age, nature is a distant amenity. I spend more time than many outside, hiking, skiing, climbing, hunting, and even, occasionally, bird watching. But there is no urgency in my relationship with the natural world. No necessity. No deep communion. The times outside are sojourns between the next warm meal and engaging Netflix series. Daniel is different. Of course, he too enjoys a warm bed and a good movie, but his sense of responsibility toward the natural world overrides his own drive for comfort. He has a gift with animals, a gift that is evident in small and large ways. His is an oddly anachronistic state of existence, one marked by the changing seasons, the needs of animals, and the mandates of rough topography. He was not born into this life. He is self-taught. He has relearned the language of nature and found some solace there. His gifts as an interlocutor between animals and people are vital and overlooked, particularly in Washington, one of the few places in the world where a resurgent carnivore population is coming into regular contact with a landscape dominated by humans. Much of the debate and conflict brought about by this unique situation has focused on wolves. With thousands of years of myths, fear, and more recently, hope pinned upon the pelage of Canis lupus, this intense focus makes sense psychologically. But the battles fought over wolves are at the core the same as those fought over other species. And while Washington may be unique in the US now, that is a dense human population surrounded by wild animals, it likely won't stay that way. Consider other less populous Western states like Montana and Idaho. Their populations are growing at astonishing clips. People moving into lands once roamed by bears, grizzlies, bobcats, coyotes, wolverines, fishers, and yes, wolves. At the same time, larger, more populous, and as a rule, more liberal states that long ago killed their native predators are clamoring for a touch of wilderness. Colorado comes to mind, with plans to reintroduce wolves there. California, too, with ongoing rewilding efforts and a healthy and surprisingly urban cougar population. The story is the same abroad. In 2015, wolves returned to the Netherlands for the first time in more than a century. Across Europe, rewilding efforts are bringing long-absent species back onto a continent that has been manhandled by humans for thousands of years. In all these cases, wild animals are coming into contact with highly altered landscapes that demand adaptation and resilience on their part. Research in Washington and elsewhere is showing how wolves species are adapting, and yet the true burden of coexistence will fall upon humanity's collective shoulders. 100, 200, or 400 years ago, the answer may have been simple: move or kill the animals. That is no longer a viable approach. Ironically, and perhaps tragically, as humans move farther from the world of rain, snow, and wind, our desire for a return to the wild, powered, I believe, by a deep genetic nostalgia, is renewed. And yet, most of us don't have the faintest idea of what that kind of life requires. Daniel Curry, in all his frenetic assuredness, does, and he wants to show us the way. The fate of the wolf in Washington is not just at stake, he argues. Instead, it's a matter of our own survival. Wolves inspire vitriol and hatred, misplaced sentimentality, urbanized ignorance. But of course, at the end of the day, these feelings are not about wolves. Instead, the wolf issue casts a harsh spotlight on our own fractured discourse, rifts that snake through nearly every aspect of American life. Daniel Curry believes he can mend these chasms in belief and perspective. That bridge needs to happen here, he tells me one winter afternoon sitting in his log home. Forget about wolves and cattle for a second, he says. It needs to happen for us, for humans. Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much, Eli. That was great. That was really amazing. I want to be first in line at the book signing when you actually release and publish your book.
Yes.
I'm touched by that. I had goosebumps all over. That was great. That just is there are so many poignant points in that piece that I would love to transition this conversation to you and Ben to have a conversation. One thing that you mentioned is, we have this opportunity to address these keystone species that have this polarizing effect. And I wonder if you two could talk a little together about how we live alongside and coexist with these species. And then from there, after you have a chance to kind of talk about that and let the conversation meander, I'll jump in and ask some questions that the audience have submitted on the Q&A. So I'll let you answer my question, which is, how do we live alongside these creatures and together?
Yeah, it's a great question, Chelsea, and I really enjoyed that, Eli. When you first mentioned your book concept to me, my first question was, can Eli ride a horse? And the answer is sort of.
No, sort of, yeah. Yeah.
Anyway, in regards to Chelsea's really important question, I think that one of the challenging things about all wildlife in some ways, but beavers especially, and wolves as well, certainly, is this mismatch between the benefits they provide and the costs they incur. And by that I mean that beavers are out there, providing all of these wonderful ecological services for all of us, right? They're acting as fire breaks. They're improving our water quality. They're, creating habitat for, the fish we like to catch. They're, storing water that we can use to irrigate our farms and so on, right? So they're providing all of these wonderful. Oh, my dog is joining us. They're providing all of these wonderful kind of public benefits. But oftentimes, the costs of living with beavers fall on private landowners like Linda, who we visited a month or so ago, whose yard was being flooded by beavers, and certainly she wanted to live with beavers and appreciated them, but they were also problematic on her property. So I think that providing resources that square those public benefits and private costs, helping private landowners live with these animals that are benefiting all of us, is sort of what we need to do, and that's exactly why installing flow devices, these pipe and fence systems that basically sort of reduce beaver ponds to a level that that humans can live with, while still providing all of the wonderful ecosystem services that come with beavers is so important. Finding those non-lethal coexistence techniques that help private landowners steward the wildlife that we all need. I think that's just so important, and probably there's a similar dynamic in the wolf world.
Yeah, and I think you really you hit it on the head when you're talking about the benefit, the cost, right? Like how are these animals impact where, and I see some evidence that this is changing, but that's where we need to shift how we think about like what is a benefit to a human, right? It can't just be a sort of a monetary calculation, because at least in the wolf world there are very good non-lethal deterrents, right, that exist and have a pretty good track record. They're not perfect, of course, but there has to be that like shared desire to use that and to implement them. And I think that's where like someone like Daniel, to me, really is a powerful voice in that way, because he can go between two different worlds. He can talk to wolf activists, and he can also hang out with ranchers and ride them into the dust often, because he's quite fit. So
right. So how do you instill that cultural change? I mean, how is it a matter of education? Is it a matter of of getting more people like Daniel who can bridge those two worlds? How do you change the kind of associations that come with this kind of polarizing species like a wolf?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think it's education, but it can't be the sort of top-down education. It has to come from someone that people are going to trust, right? And that's really tricky. That even Diamond City, that the scene of my short thing, that was like a thriving town, and these sort of extractive industries were really provided a really good living, and that's all gone in Northeast Washington. Not all, a lot of it's gone in Northeast Washington, and people are struggling, right? We get some of the poorest counties in the state. And so for this book that I'm working on, I did a lot of broad ranging research, and I see all these studies looking at how do you get people in different African countries that are very poor to buy into conservation, right? Because it's like they have immediate needs, and we don't think of it in that same sort of framework here. Even though the people that are living with wolves, they've seen a whole cultural way of life and way of making money dry up, right? And that it's not going to go back, and I don't think it should. But I do think that needs to be addressed and considered when we talk about coexistence. So I don't know. Yeah, I don't know if there's one simple answer, but I think a big part of it is people like Daniel, and I know the Lands Council has been doing work around that of building these sort of bridges and while still maintaining advocating for science and conservation, and you don't have to abdicate that, but there does have to be this sort of effort, so this step forward.
Yeah.
And that's one thing I really admire about your work, Ben, is that you're so good at talking about what the ways that we can coexist, particularly around beavers, but I've seen it with other things and other work that you've written, and explaining it very clearly and sort of this can be done. And that's such an invaluable thing. So I really appreciate that and admire that about your work.
Yeah, thanks. I think that beavers are a very interesting animal in that, because they provide this water storage benefit, they're attractive to the agricultural community in a way that a lot of other species aren't, right? I mean, Joel Kretz is the person who comes to mind, a person who has opposed to the return of wolves in Eastern Washington, but sponsored the beaver bill that basically made Washington the most sort of like liberal, progressive beaver state in the country. And you guys probably didn't know that. You live in the best place to relocate a beaver in the United States of America. Everybody living in Washington on this call I think that's pretty cool. And that's really thanks to Joel Kretz, who sponsored this bill and had the first beaver moved in Washington State, moved to his ranch by the Lands Council, because as a young man he had read a book about this kind of the power of beavers to create these wonderful sort of water features on a homestead. So beavers, I think there's kind of something uniquely beneficial about them. They're an easier sell. Certainly easier than wolves, but I think easier than a lot of critters, because you can see the benefits they provide in this really visceral way. Working on this book, I talked to a bunch of ranchers in Nevada, when drought hit Eastern Nevada, the guys who had beavers were the guys who survived the drought, basically, because their cattle still had a water source. So it's the species. And I was saying earlier that they do incur some costs to private landowners, but there are also these incredible benefits that are just much more evident, I think, than the benefits that come with a lot of other creatures.
But correct me if I'm wrong, but like there's been a time when beavers were pretty well hated, right? Like that. So how did that shift, I wonder?
Yeah, and they still are hated in a lot of quarters, of course. They dam and irrigation ditches, right? That's kind of for people in the agricultural world, that's kind of their big offense is they just mess with irrigation infrastructure. It's still evolving. I mean, it's interesting that there are just these little pockets, I think, of progressive pro-beaver ideology that spring up when a person like Daniel sort of persuades the people in that area, so like northeastern Nevada, there's this kind of wonderful little cluster of pro-beaver thought. In southern Idaho, there's a rancher named Jay Wild, who's this really great advocate for beaver restoration, who basically used beavers to turn his kind of seasonal stream on his ranch into a perennial stream. And he's converted a lot of people. So it's interesting, wherever there's, but you have to have that kind of that patient zero, the kind of the first person who experiences the benefits of these animals and then convinces his neighbors to live alongside.
Sounds like there is a lot of benefit between having organizations like the Lands Council and local champions like Daniel Curry and like you, Ben, or like people who read about beavers early on. We have a few questions in the chat, if you don't mind if I jump in and ask those. People are very curious. A great question from Greg. Can you comment on the different dynamic between wolves and beavers from an area that is rich in beavers like Voyageurs and beaver depleted like Yellowstone?
Yeah, I'll jump in. I mean, that's a great point. So I think that in some ways the story in Yellowstone, really illustrates the story of the American West, right? In that, so in Yellowstone, wolves were deliberately extirpated by the National Park Service, which led to this, kind of elk population explosion, which led to, the over-browsing of streamside willow and aspen and cottonwood, which led to the destabilization of stream banks and this kind of catastrophic erosion event. So Yellowstone used to be kind of covered in beaver ponds, and now it's sort of like dry pasture land in the kind of the northern range. Areas that we think of as kind of these sagebrush plains used to be wetlands thanks to beavers. So I think the Yellowstone in some ways illustrates what happens when you don't have wolves and beavers kind of working together symbiotically. These are two keystone species whose fates are deeply intertwined. Whereas, in Voyageurs National Park in Minnesota, where there are really healthy populations of both wolves and beavers, and really have been for, a very long time span, what you see is wolves preying on beavers, wolves influencing where beavers can settle can build their dams and create ponds. You've got these two species interacting in this really sort of holistic way. So I think that, both those national parks are great illustrations of first what happens when you don't have these two species, and then more positively in Voyagers, which is this incredible, matrix of lakes and ponds and wetlands, how much good beavers and wolves can do together, and how deeply their fates are connected.
Thank you for that. And I just want to take a quick moment to pause and make a little pitch, if you don't mind, before our next few questions from our lovely attendees. I first want to thank Eli and Ben once again, and we have information on where to buy their books, because it's not too late, or their materials. It's not too late to buy books for Christmas and Christmas presents, and there's a link to Auntie's to buy Eager. And for Eli, we just have to follow him on social so he can be first in line. I mean, I'm going to be first in line, but you can be second in line to buy his book and have it signed when it comes out. And I'm sure that you can follow along his other great readings or writings that he's going to publish in the next few months and weeks. I also really want to ask, tonight is a fundraiser. It is our holiday party. So I would love to ask for the support of everyone here on the call. We've made it really easy to donate. We still are going to answer questions, but tonight we would love it if you could support us, whatever amount, to make sure that we can continue not only doing this work that both Eli and Ben have referenced as being critical to their understanding of their particular species and just to the field itself. And also just so that we can continue bringing people together like this. That's another key part of the Lands Council. So we did a little fancy text to donate. You can also just go to landscouncil.org, but you can text that number 66866, really easy, and donate whatever amount through secure PayPal. We really, really, truly appreciate the support of our members and donors. I mean, that's how we're here today doing this, and that's how we have these rock star attendees. So we're gonna get to another question, but if you could all just pull out your phones and make a quick donation, we would be eternally, eternally grateful. So I'm going to pick a question here. There is one from Laura. How do wolves and beavers interact with each other, and what benefits do the partnerships provide for each other?
Eli, you have any thoughts about that?
Well, only that you wrote a great story about it recently from Voyagers, right? And I'm going to misremember the exact details, but that was great.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that, look, these are two species that are deeply connected, right? I mean, and so essentially, right? I mean, what do beavers need? Beavers need wood, right? Both as a food source and a building material. They need that stream side aspen and willow and cottonwood, that vegetation. And when you don't have wolves, there's really nothing preventing both wild ungulates, elk and deer, as well as, domestic ungulates, cattle in places, where streams are being intensively grazed, from basically hanging out in those valley bottoms and devouring all that stuff. And at the same time, I mean, beavers are also a critical food source for wolves. I mean, we sort of think of wolves as being these cursorial, sort of chase down predators, right? You imagine a pack of wolves chasing an elk across a plain. But that might have been mine. But wolves are also ambush predators, right? They very happily sort of lurk alongside beaver canals and trails and surprise beavers and just yank them out of the water. So beavers are a critical prey source for wolves, and wolves are kind of a critical ecosystem engineer that beavers need for their own subsistence. So these are two species that really depend closely on each other.
Yes, definitely.
My fire alarm went off. I'm sorry. I guess I've gotten better at building fire since this scene I wrote about.
When the cozy reading nook goes wrong.
Right, is your flue open?
Yeah. Yes, I learned that lesson.
Another quick question from an anonymous attendee. Do you think the legal take of wolves is key for communities to accept and be willing to coexist with wolves?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's going to be very pertinent here in Washington in the next couple of years. I don't, based on what I've read and seen, I don't think it is key. There's actually some really interesting research that just came out earlier this fall about that, and basically looking at whether a legalized take period, like hunting season essentially, led to less or more poaching. And their research, which is it's not definitive, but said that it led to actually more poaching, and sort of the theory is that it, I don't know, makes it feel like just more okay, like, oh, if I can hunt this animal, then I can poach it as well. So I don't think that it is necessary. From what I've read and what I've seen, I think it's a tricky thing though, because then you do have to account for the social situation of these rural communities. But from everything we know about predator dynamics, we don't know, there's a lot we don't know. And so I think until it's really clearly shown how a hunt would impact like the dispersal of the pack and whatnot, I think it would be better not to. So that's sort of my informed opinion, I guess.
Well, that's great. Thank you so much for that. We're kind of running out of time for this, and there are more questions we didn't have answered. We will, if you want to recopy your question and throw your email address on there, either Lands Council staff, or we can ask these wonderful celebrities to also help answer these questions. In the meantime, I really just want to thank everyone for being here tonight. I don't want to take up any more time. Ben or Eli, do you have any final words on the evening?
I just wanted to say, Eli can't say this because Eli's an objective journalist, but as a board member, I just wanted to say thank you all so much for your support here. It's really integral to the Lands Council's success and the restoration of beavers to the inland Northwest. I so appreciate it. And I wanted to thank Eli too. Eli is really one of the writers who's helping us best make sense of environmental change and politics and policy in this region. He's really an indispensable voice in understanding this area. So I just want to say thanks so much to Eli for being with us, and we're so excited for your book, and thanks to all of you for being here tonight.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, and thanks for tuning in. It was really a pleasure, and organizations like this are just, that outreach is so important, and that's one of those things that the Lands Council does really well.
Well, we're honored, flattered, and just so grateful to have each and every one of our attendees that showed up tonight. Thank you so much. And of course, to our Lands Council staff behind the scenes who are doing the work. Thank you so much, Laura, Kat, Chris, Amanda, Maggie, Lindsay, Mike. Thank you all so much for your work making the Lands Council what it is, and to all past staff members too. It sounds like we're going to need to do another one of these because there are more questions than we could answer. So again, if you would like your question answered and it's burning, throw your email and your name in along with your question again, and we'll get that taken care of. And stay tuned. This was a really, really fun night. We're super grateful, and cheers. Happy holidays. We hope to be in touch with you soon.